Hey guys, welcome back to episode 2 of how to make a hot glue gun with PVC pipe. In episode 1, I showed you how I made the heating element. In this episode, I will make the rest of the glue gun and show you how the entire mechanism works. So let's get started. I'm going to use two different diameter PVC pipes here obviously. This one is 1 inch inner diameter or 33.40mm outer diameter. Seriously guys, this doesn't make any sense. Why use both the imperial and metric system on the inner and outer diameter separately? Anyway, the other pipe is 3/4 of an inch inner diameter or 1 inch outer diameter, which you can obviously see that this pipe can easily slide inside the larger pipe. I have cut two small pieces from these PVC pipes, with the smaller one cut at an angle, and I have also added a small notch to it so that it can be glued together to give it the rough shape of the glue gun. Before building anything, you need to be sure about the design and how it's going to look and how it's going to function. So I took a marker pen and drawn some lines here and there where I assume I'm going to make the cuts and glue the handle. I took a full size hacksaw and started putting all the cuts where it's necessary, and to make all the corner cuts and round cuts I'm going to use my good old soldering iron to melt my way around. Caution: do the melting stuff in a well ventilated area, as fumes from the melting plastic can make you sick. Other than that, it's an effective technique to make slots and notches, but you have to be patient as it's time consuming. The soldering iron will leave a rough and jagged surface and you will need to file it to make it smooth. The file that I'm using here, I made it myself by pasting multiple small hacksaw blade pieces together with epoxy, and it works very well. It took me some time to file it, but after I was done, I am ready for the next process, which is gluing both the pieces together. For the initial gluing process, I used super glue to join both the pieces until I apply epoxy glue to it and it gets fully cured. Here you can see how it looks after the epoxy glue is fully cured. Now it has started to look like a glue gun. After that, I started to take some measurements to make the slider that will push the glue stick forward. I'm going to use the back cover of an old bar style cell phone that died long ago to make the slider. I took some time thinking and taking measurements, and then I figured out how to lock the slider into its place. Once again, bamboo to my rescue. The plan is gluing two bamboo sticks to the inside wall of the pipe in such a way that the slider can slide back and forth but not in any other direction. After that, I need to build the glue stick gripper that will grip the glue stick and push it towards the front heating element. For that, I used a small piece of 0.38mm aluminum sheet. I used the glue stick to give it the proper shape like a tunnel, because this gripper will ride on top of the slider that I made earlier, pushing the glue stick through it. Now for the gripper to grip onto the glue stick, it needs a jaw that will open and close depending on my input to the trigger or lever. So I used the same material to make the gripper jaw, which is the 0.38mm aluminum sheet. The gripper jaw will be connected with the input lever, and for that I need to make a hole in the slider, as all the connecting rods will go underneath the slider. I again used the soldering iron to make the holes in the slider. As the plastic is soft, it didn't take much time. To make it easier, I have also marked the places where I need to make the hole and for it to become precise. As the hole in the slider is done, I can get back to the gripper jaw. I'm using a bicycle wheel spoke here to make the gripper jaw extension. At this point, this might not make any sense for any of the parts and how they work, so keep watching and eventually you will understand how it works. So this is how the gripper and the gripper jaw will be mounted, and in the middle section the glue stick is going to go through. The actuation of the jaw will grip the glue stick as the trigger lever is pressed, and when the spring or rubber band pulls it back, it releases the glue stick. So the glue stick will move only in one direction. The gripper and the gripper jaw, everything is going to get glued into the slider. To make the trigger lever, I took a small piece of wire and then I slightly bended it to give it the rough shape of the trigger lever. Then I took some M-Seal, which is epoxy putty, and covered the wire around with it. Before it's fully cured, I also made two holes on it. I am going to use bicycle spoke here to make the hinge for the trigger lever, and this is how the trigger would look like once it's fitted onto it. Getting back to the gripper jaw, I glued it with epoxy to make it more sturdy, and I'm going to use wire insulation here as bushing so that it can move freely while being glued on the slider. Initially use super glue to fix the part, and once all the measurements are correct, I use epoxy to glue it finally. After the super glue has dried, I checked whether the jaw can move freely or not. I put the top part of the gripper to take some measurements and to see how it would look like or if there is anything wrong, but everything was okay. So I glued it using epoxy, and now you can see how the entire mechanism works. This is how it's going to look like once it's inside the glue gun frame, and with the glue stick inserted it appears more like a glue gun than some piece of plastic. Moving on to the next step, I'm using a steel wire to make an anchor point for the connecting rod. It's going to get fitted under the slider, which will get connected with the trigger lever. I glued it with epoxy and it looks steady enough to handle the load. My initial plan was to hook the rubber band under the slider with the anchor point, which will pull the slider back after the trigger lever is released, but it was jamming, so I glued two hooks made out of steel wire on both sides of the glue stick gripper tunnel that pulls the slider more effectively. The slight change in the design will not affect any other design features or the functionality of the gun. The next work to do is fixing the trigger lever. I've used bicycle wheel spoke here as the hinge. I took some measurements and did some markings, and then moved on to making the connecting rod that will connect the slider with the trigger lever. I initially didn't know how the connecting wire needs to be shaped, so I went through various trial and error stages, and finally I got the proper way of doing it. Here you can see how the connecting rod is fitted and how it's going to actuate the gripper and the gripper jaw and the slider all in one motion of the finger in the trigger lever. Now it's time to put it together. First I have connected the connecting rod with the slider, and then after that I have put the slider inside the glue gun frame. After that, the connecting rod is accessible from the trigger lever side. I hooked the trigger lever with the connecting and then pushed the hinge pin through the lever. I have already filed a groove in the glue gun where the hinge pin will sit, and then later I will glue it. Here you can see the actuation of the trigger lever along with the slider. It moves very smoothly. I took some measurements with the glue stick inserted, and it appears to be fine as well. Here as you can see, I have used wire insulation again to keep the trigger lever centered before gluing everything together. While holding the trigger lever hinge pin, I actuated the lever to see if it was still smooth, which it was. After making sure everything is okay, I glued it together with epoxy and kept it aside for some time to fully cure. The glue is fully cured, and now I will start testing it. Starting from the mechanical actuation of the trigger to how the glue stick passes through the slider, I will observe everything, and if a fault is found, it will be fixed. I have also attached the rubber band that will pull the slider back after it was released. For now it's a temporary setup. Later the rubber band will be fixed in a different way with an end cap. The actuation mechanism perfectly pushes the glue stick forward, and the gripping mechanism also works perfectly. I will also use a 1-inch end cap to cover the back side of the glue gun. Now the rubber band and the glue stick will pass through the end cap, so it needs to be aligned, and that's why I have put 2 markings on the sides. With that marking I can easily align the cap. I have also made some markings for the holes that I am about to make. With the help of the soldering iron, I made the bigger hole in the end cap and then filed it smooth. I made the smaller hole with a handheld drill bit. Once it's ready, it was time to test it again. I put the rubber band in the hooks and then used a small piece of wire as a needle to get it through the small hole in the cap. The cap is then aligned with the markings in the sides, and then I pulled out the rubber band and then used the needle as a lock to hold it. The movement is smooth, and to prevent the trigger lever from moving too much in the front, I glued a small piece of bamboo right in front of the trigger lever. As you can see here from the front, the actuation of the mechanism and how it moves. I put the glue stick inside to see how it works or if there is any problem. The stick goes in smoothly and the actuation is also smooth. I can adjust the rubber band tension just by doubling it, but for now it's not needed. You can see here how the gripper jaw moves up and down to grip the glue stick. Initially, when I put the glue stick, it pushes the gripper jaw down and goes in freely. The glue stick can only move in one direction, which is forward. That's because if you try to pull it out from the back, it gets locked in the jaw. As the trigger is pressed, the glue stick advances by a few centimeters till the end. Now I am on the final stage of this build. It's time to put the heating tip on the gun. I replaced the wires with a more thinner wire that can be easily passed through the center of the gun and out of the hand grip without obstructing the path of the other mechanisms in the rear part of the gun. As you can see here, the heating tip is in the gun, but it's not glued with epoxy. I temporarily glued it with super glue. I did that because I needed to sort the wires out and take measurements to make sure it's aligned. I can break the super glue easily if the measurements are wrong, but with epoxy it's hard to break and it takes time to dry. You can clearly see here that the heating tip is straight in line with the glue stick gripper, which is a good thing. The wire comes out of the bottom of the hand grip through the tiny hole that I made earlier. Peeking through the top of the slider, you can see how the wires are managed. I applied epoxy glue to the heating tip, making it fully solid so that it doesn't move, and now the only thing left is connecting a longer wire. The wires needed to be secured to prevent it from getting suddenly pulled, and the solution was a bamboo plug. Now the only thing left is putting the rubber band in, and you can see here how the rubber band is fitted. I'm using a small piece of wire here to hold the rubber band instead of the larger needle. So guys, it's finished and now let's test it. Putting the glue stick was easy. I'm going to power it with a 12-volt battery. Using some drawing board clips, I hooked it with the battery and it almost immediately started getting hot from the outside, but the glue takes some time to melt as it's absorbing the heat. It took about 1.5 minutes to start flowing. For me, it worked like a normal glue gun and I'm impressed how it came out to be. Although the heating tip looks weird, but it works. Even after I disconnected it from the battery, the glue kept on melting for quite some time due to the residual heat. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button and share it with your friends, and if you are new then subscribe. I will see you soon.